Pure Strategy session, how seventh generation is mitigating greenhouse gas hotspots in its supply chain as part of the B Corp Global Climate Summit. We are so excited to be here this week and to offer this conversation with seventh generation as we work together to help you transform your business to create a more sustainable future. We are proud to be joining more than 2,000 global climate leaders at the summit this week who are working so hard to advance a just, regenerative, zero carbon future. I am Melanie Fleming, Marketing Manager for Pure Strategies. Our team provides sustainability consulting to companies looking to develop goals, enhance their sustainability program, and implement changes in their products, packaging, and supply chains. We hope that our conversation today will help companies advance environmental and social performance in their business. You can find additional resources, research reports, and case studies on our website, purestrategies.com, including information about work that we have done for Walmart, Seventh Generation, Ben & Jerry's, and other known sustainability leaders. Your host today, Tim Greiner, is Managing Director of Pure Strategies and co-founder of Pure Strategies and the Chemical Footprint Project. Tim has been providing custom sustainability solutions to corporate clients for over 20 years. During this 30-minute session, Tim will be talking with Chris Lyon, Manager of Community and Environmental Impact for Seventh Generation. As a member of Seventh Generation's corporate consciousness team, Chris designs and implements programs and strategies that improve the company's upstream supply chain sustainability. His work ranges from guiding overall supplier engagement to implementing solutions to help Seventh Generation's ambitious 2030 science-based target goals. Chris also leads the Seventh Generation Foundation Climate Justice Grant Program and serves as Assistant Director for the foundation. Today, Tim and Chris will discuss Seventh Generation's ambitious climate goals, footprint, and interventions designed to reduce emissions from suppliers and in raw material sourcing. They will also explore identifying and mitigating greenhouse gas hotspots in the company's supply chain. We aim to have time at the end of their conversation to cover your questions. The audience will be muted, so please provide your questions in the Q&A or chat fields. I will ask as many questions as time will allow. The recording of this session will also be posted on the Pure Strategies and B Corp websites. And now I'd like to hand it off to Tim.
Thank you, Melanie. Appreciate that. And welcome, Chris. I'm excited for our conversation today.
Thanks, Tim. Happy to be here.
Yeah, and it's great to have to support the B Corp Climate Summit. I know Seventh Generation's been a B Corp. Do you know how many years Seventh Gen's been a B Corp for?
We were a founding member in 2007.
That's awesome.
So,
yeah.
A little bit.
Yeah, it's been a while. And Pure Strategies became a B Corp several years ago, and we've also become a benefit corporation. And what I think was interesting is when you were acquired by Unilever, Seventh Generation was acquired by Unilever, you retained your B Corp status, if I understand correctly.
That's right. So as a wholly owned subsidiary, we're still able to maintain our own certification, which is really important to our culture and our brand as a whole.
That's excellent. Well, today we'll be talking about climate change and climate targets in the business. But before we dive into that, it would be great if you could tell us a little bit about the role you play at Seventh Generation. What's your job like? What do you do for the company?
Yeah, for sure. And I think Melanie gave a good introduction to start off of. So I've been supporting our upstream supply chain and really focusing on how to engage our manufacturing partners and our key suppliers in helping us meet our goals. And one of the things that's been most exciting is being Seventh Gen, it's not just supporting achievement of carbon targets, but it's actually focusing on how we partner with folks and how we help them in their sustainability journey, because we believe that our consumers would expect our manufacturers to be as serious about the environment and equity and people as we are. So while it may not show up on some of the kind of high level carbon targets, it's highly important that we maintain a connection with our manufacturing partners and suppliers so that we can leverage our kind of collective power to change the things that need to happen further into the supply chain. So aside from supporting that, the decarbonization work has been super important. We talk a lot about the impacts of climate change, the disproportionate impact on BIPOC populations, and the extractive economies that come from being tied to these systems. And so for us, it's important to make sure that we're setting aggressive goals and then doing everything we can to get as close to those goals. And we tend to use an aspirational lens when we set those goals, because we know it drives us a little bit further than we would if we just selected something that felt achievable or real. So for me, it's been that tie between empowering our suppliers and our supply chain, and then also working on kind of the core fundamentals of what it means to be a sustainable manufacturer, and helping us achieve the goals that we've set.
Terrific. There's so much to dive into there. The comprehensive nature, the way you're engaging your suppliers, then specifically as you're talking about carbon and the disparate impacts of climate change. But before we dive into that, let's just step up a little bit and just briefly, could you cover off on how Seventh Generation is addressing climate change kind of throughout the organization? How does the business, how is it thinking about the climate crisis and its role in managing and dealing and preventing further climate issues?
Yeah, for sure. So, we have a really broad agenda when it comes to answering that question. And what we've tried to do over time is hone our own messaging. So where we might have started, 5 or 6 years ago with talking about climate change and talking about social equity, we've honed our message most recently in the last few years into climate justice and equity. And recognizing that those two are deeply interconnected has been really important for us. So we tried to utilize our power and our voice to ensure that we're raising the voices of folks whose voices aren't traditionally raised, and that we're shifting systems. So we have a very strong activism and advocacy program, which aims to extend green power and renewable energy across as many markets as we can. So we'll work towards legislation on green power and energy. And we also don't just pay attention to the carbon, we pay attention to toxics, because we know that many of the manufacturing facilities that make toxics are part of the climate justice gap that we have in the inequity. So we'll also work on toxics and trying to help the world move towards a more sustainable form of chemistry. So we have our activism and advocacy program. We also have a foundation, and we direct half of our philanthropy to Native American and Indigenous people, focused on frontline solutions to climate change. We look at it as we design our products. We understand that we need to find a way to use less and make more, and that's a real challenge for a growing business. So I think product design remains kind of the most critical area that we have to hit. It's the leading edge, and everything else is reactive for us and costly and expensive and time consuming. And for us, it's also having built-in accountability. So we have a social mission board that guides our work, that is comprised of everyone from Mindy Luber at Ceres to the head of global home care for Unilever and our former co-founders. So a number of ways in which we're trying to raise the expectation and just say, this has to be in everything that we do. It's a filter we push through. And supply chain is obviously a really active area with a lot of need, given the kind of extractive systems that we're tied to.
Right. You talked a little bit about being aspirational and setting targets. Could you just describe for us a little bit about some of the commitments that the company's made around climate?
Yeah, so one of our largest commitments has been to science-based targets. And so we set science-based targets a number of years ago, and doing so said that we would reduce our overall emissions 90% against a 2012 base year. And within our upstream, it's an 80% reduction against that 2012 base year. And for anybody who's in growth mode, you know that those targets can quickly get further and further away. And I think by setting them and knowing they were aggressive, and in many ways, our theory was, if the whole industry needs to shift by 30%, do we really think that the whole industry is going to shift by 30%? And the answer is no. So we're over-indexing, and we're accepting that responsibility and taking on that task. So that goal has not just affected our upstream, but it's consumer use. It's when you wash your clothes or dry your clothes, and what you're tied to for an energy grid, whether you use hot water. All these things come into play, and the science-based targets have been a nice way for us to bucket our impact and then begin to carve out interventions against each of those areas in a way that feels tangible and still stretches.
So yeah, so that upstream portion, which I know is where you focus, that's everything from raw material extraction and processing of the raw materials, and then to different factories that are then like building them into ingredients or into the plastic or packaging components, and right to the manufacturers that make the products. So does it also include shipping the product to the retailer or to the consumer?
To the warehouse. So once it gets to the distribution facility is where that ends.
Uh-huh.
And then from then we consider it the downstream cycle, and more of the tie that's in fulfillment to the consumer.
Right. So a huge reduction target in that whole upstream area. How do you bite that off? Like, so
Yeah.
it's one thing to like measure it, right, and estimate it, and I'd love to hear a little bit about that. And then how do you begin to like chunk that out and think about like how you're going to tackle it?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think the first thing is to take the most simple thing that you can do first step, which is to ask what are the products and materials that we're using, and then to step through, and one easy way is to look at volumes. You probably have an association between the amount of emissions created and the volumes that you're using. And so for us, we use a lot of palm oil. And so there's a pretty good chance that, just alone because of the volume, that would be something material to us. But it also has a unique impact on land and people. And the land portion itself is fairly intensive. So that becomes a very quickly an easy one to just point to on a page and say, we need to do more here. So I think we started by trying to understand how to look at the materials, ingredients that we're using, knowing that we can work on green power in our manufacturing facilities. That's pretty tangible today. We can work on efficiency in transportation. We're lucky to partner with Unilever on that. But for us, it really is looking at that 67% of emissions upstream being tied to the actual things that we use to make the things. And once there, it becomes kind of self-evident, and we've stepped through a process to identify kind of what the different emissions factors are. And Pure Strategies has been an incredible partner in helping us understand that, so that we can say, wow, this is something we use a lot of, and it's hugely impactful when it comes to emissions. And that's the starting place. And we don't have a roadmap to all of the key materials, but we have initial ideas about what those interventions might look like. And we've dove in kind of headlong into palm already, knowing how important it is for us to answer that question of impact.
So so on these materials, 67%, you mentioned palm. So I'd love to dive in on palm, and then maybe after we do that, like cover off on like a couple of other of those carbon intensive raw materials and what are some of the strategies you're using. Because I think that would be really illustrative for us to learn more about how you're thinking about some of these high impact materials.
Yeah, of course. So Palm has been kind of all consuming. It's the full-time job that I do on the side, and tried to find all the time that we can. But it's a super important area for us that has a lot of complexity. So we utilize derivatives of palm kernel oil specifically, which make some of the kind of opportunities to support better methods a little bit harder than it is if you're using whole palm oil. So we have an additional layer of complexity because we've chosen to be plant-based, and we use chemical surfactants. So we're at the front of kind of green chemistry, which means we're at the front of people trying to take accountability in a system that hasn't quite figured that out yet. So for us, the first thing we did was just to work and understand kind of the eco profile of what are the key drivers of emissions within the palm supply chain. And what do we know today that is actual, and what are we modeling? And I think that's really important in this work too, is we're not going to be able to have traceable supply chains on every ingredient everywhere. But it is important to kind of recognize where you have real numbers that you can lean on, and real interventions that can shift things, and where you have to do some more work. alongside to better understand your actual impact. So for palm, we identified land use change and deforestation as the two key drivers. And while converting, the materials definitely contribute to emissions, it's actually in the field. It's when peat is disturbed and forests are cut down and emissions are released, and you kind of take a double hit. So our focus has really been on NDPE, or no deforestation, peat or exploitation, palm, with no land use change. That's our goal for 2025. And we think we're going to be well ahead of that. It's not just saying it's deforestation free, but it's also how we verify that it's deforestation free. And in a world that's suddenly waking up to how challenging it is to actually say this is deforestation free, there's a lot of competition as well. So we've kind of focused on that as one. The near term is RSPO mass balance derivatives. And by the end of the year, we should be at 96 or 97% mass balance RSPO, which further kind of increases, even though it's not perfect, it increases the sustainability profile of the palm that we're using without breaking the bank, so to speak, because segregated supply chains and derivatives are really challenging. Yep. And then it's also thinking about where to from here. How do we, formulate differently? How do we reduce the amount of palm that's needed by finding other ingredients that might increase efficiency? Or most importantly, I think that the end question, how do we begin to take accountability and responsibility for the impacts we've created? And so we're also exploring some investment in the palm supply chain and supply shed as a way for us to answer that question, because we think it's super important that a company named 7th Generation will look back and consider the impact that we have had, and not just that going forward.
Why not shift away from palm? If palm has these challenges, I think it would be reasonable to ask, well, how about another oil source to make your surfactants?
Yeah, and I think the biggest challenge that we've had is that the things that we can think up as solutions today either don't exist or aren't scalable in a way that would reduce our actual impact. And when we've modeled this, what we found is if we can truly get to no deforestation and no land use change with our palm, we actually have the best profile of all. We're fixing a really challenged system in a way that allows us to fix what we've been part of without moving to an alternative to hope it's a little bit better. And I think the other piece here that gets complicated is if we all shift to coconut oil, we know that coconut oil will be the new palm in 5 years. And, I think there's a lot of fortune telling that goes on, but the reality is they're not that different at their core. And in fact, the systems that are utilized and are coming online as demand increases look more like the way in which we've grown palm than less. So there's some challenges to just jumping out. So we're kind of taking the multifaceted approach of increase efficiency of how much palm we need, deepen the sustainability of the palm we're tied to, be open to some of those other alternatives and adopt them when they're scalable. And so we do continue to work with Unilever in particular, who's been really amazing in supporting kind of what longer lead technologies might look like.
Thanks for that deep dive on palm. Let's transition to, quick question. Have you looked at hemp oil as an alternative?
I have not.
Ben had asked that question, so.
I haven't. I think this is one of the places where we work most closely with Pure Strategies to say, we've heard this hemp oil idea, what's behind it? And Tim, I don't know if you have any insight, but what I think I found is that getting the oils into the derivatives is actually the challenge. Many of the derivatives are processed in 2-3 ton tanks. And so unless you're building your own supply chain, which is wonderful in concept, but in reality, super challenging in many ways, especially from a resilience perspective, it can be challenging. We haven't found anything that's seemed like a better alternative. Do you have anything to add, Tim?
Yeah, I would just say I don't know the molecular structure of hemp, but the oils from palm and coconut, those carbon chains are almost exactly similar. So they're like, they can be replaced with one another, but I don't know the structure of hemp. So it's an interesting question. But yes, I've heard the same thing. I mean, the challenge is how do you get the hemp oil to the manufacturer that's making the surfactant, which
Yeah,
being the
and I'd
region.
also just say for any smaller B Corps, that we also fight against our size. So many times people think if you're big, it's easy to create change. And I think in reality, what we're seeing in the marketplace today is it's actually a heck of a lot easier to start up a business, bake in the things that feel like the newer, better solutions, and have that as part of your business proposition than to go back and renovate and upgrade. And I think that's something we're challenged with. So trying to shift our product portfolio is a great example. We have 8X laundry detergent that has a lower emissions profile as well as a much better environmental profile all the way across. It's concentrated and formulated to be less impactful. And as much as we try to sell our 8X, we have to figure out how to transition away from those big jugs of 100-ounce laundry. And ultimately, that's also up to consumers, and it's also up to our retailers. And so we're trying to shift in that direction, but our ship turns a little bit slower than maybe somebody who's in startup mode.
Yeah, that's one of the ones where the technical solution of 8X, it's like one of the biggest things that 7th Gen can do to help you achieve your target. Technically, you guys have figured all that out, but how do you get consumer acceptance to, move from thinking I need a big jug of laundry detergent versus this small one that does the same amount of cleaning?
So, Tim, you'd asked about other kind of drivers of emissions, and I think there's one that we should absolutely mention that I think is a great case study. So fibers and polymers are the two other larger groups, and the fourth is actually citric acid and sodium citrate. So those two citrates, the process by which they're manufactured and dried is intensive and can be tied to really dirty grids. So we saw an opportunity to ring fence where we source. And so we now source we're moving towards North America and Europe. And we're doing so because the manufacturing facilities in those countries tend to be more efficient and the grids are cleaner. And by moving to those, we've been able to kind of project a 50% savings. So reducing our emissions in half by going there. So that's a great case study of just by contracting a buy with a North American business, something that used to be open, for any of our manufacturers to choose, called open source items, we're able to save money and reduce our emissions. We this year also paired that with some of the palm work to get it through all of our internal business processes, so that the savings from citrics actually offset the move to mass balance palm. So we're really trying to find creative ways to make sure that we're reducing the additional cost for an organization.
That's a win-win. That's awesome. You mentioned also, and maybe we'll just have this last question, and we can turn to some of the audience questions. And I want to encourage folks to post any questions they might have in the chat or the Q&A function. You had talked about partnering with your manufacturers. So could you describe briefly like what that manufacturing network looks like? And then what's the partnership opportunity? How is climate part of that? I know it's comprehensive because you're a B Corp and you're viewing it comprehensively, but if you focused in on the climate component, that'd be great.
Yeah. So we have about 17 manufacturing partners that support us in North America. We have one in Europe, and so for a lot of them, when we look at impact, it's the first and the easiest is green power. So we developed a green power program to shift not only our manufacturing partners, but our key tier two. So the folks tied to SLS, sodium lauryl sulfate, the folks tied to fibers, and the folks tied to polymers. And we're deploying that program back into the supply chain to deliver actually of all the interventions that we've seen, the largest potential savings, even above the palm work. So renewable energy remains a really tangible thing that we can support them with. So we pay a professional to give them an analysis and support them in that work. And then otherwise, it's just collecting key sustainability data and asking what's important to them and asking if they've thought about climate. And we had two of our manufacturing partners and suppliers who have become certified with their own science-based targets. And both of those conversations actually started with 7th Gen. They were just asks. And I think that's what we're realizing too, is asking and engaging with them and then helping remove barriers is a really effective way to create change in those networks.
Yeah, you kind of answered one of the questions I had, which was like, what was the reception like when you asked them to engage in green power? And so it sounds like some are just like jumping full ahead and even going the science-based target route. But I would think for other suppliers, I don't know how advanced they are, like how did they respond to that? Were they familiar with it? Was this, then you had to educate them on what you meant by green power? What's that been like?
Yeah. So across the spectrum, some folks, we did an early analysis of kind of their climate readiness or their reduction readiness.
Yeah.
Some folks are just overwhelmed, and so we have a pathway towards really high quality RECs that we've worked with native up here in Vermont to kind of procure their tied to really impactful additional projects on the ground. So for some folks, it's like, I don't want to do that. Can I purchase that? And the answer is sure now. But RECs are our first step. It's not the answer. And we provided this high quality one. I think it's also just being present. I think the first year of working with our partners, they were trying to figure out whether I was serious and whether I was still going to ask about the goal, which I think is part of manufacturing. And once they know that you're serious and they get it and you're not going away, I think that changes as well. And then celebrating wins and sharing those within the network so people see that others are actually doing this, and it becomes more exciting to fall behind.
Are you providing, I'm just looking at Daniela's question, are you providing any funding or training to the suppliers on climate or more generally on sustainability?
Yeah, so we pay for our partner to be deployed as a resource. That's a line item on our carbon tax, and we'll help them figure out how to kind of measure their impact based on our percentage of production, as well as how to explore whatever projects are most kind of valuable to them. So Foster is the company we've been working with, and they're experts in this space. And so they're able to figure out how to remove those barriers in the conversation. And it might be on-site solar, it might be a power purchase agreement, and it might be purchasing from your utility. And they're able to provide kind of a bespoke report that just says, here are the options. These can actually save you money, and remove that kind of initial fear that many have about overwhelm if they go out on their own to try and answer this question.
You slipped in that little word carbon tax, or that phrase. So yeah, let's expand that up a little bit. So you have a carbon tax at seventh generation. How does that tax work, and how does it fund some of the work that you're doing?
Yeah, so it's we've shifted a couple of times over the past year, kind of how we approach it, and what it remains is a commitment to apply a dollar amount to the tons of emissions that we have with our product. And so depending on the year, the opportunities that are available might be more or less. And what we've tried to do is just use that to fund some of the direct reduction work, and use that also to think about if there are offsets at the end of the year that we can purchase. And the first priority is always direct reductions. So we'd rather spend more in this moment on getting our suppliers green powered than simply purchasing an offset. And whatever's left, then we usually apply. But it's been a great fun for us to kind of have, just to look at and to make some hard calls. And year over year, the challenges change. So we have a different strategy that kind of comes out of it each year.
Well, we're just about out of time here, but before I turn it back over to Melanie, there's one more question from Andrew. He's asking, are there any wins to share regarding waste management and consumer recycling, I guess, like end of life / consumer recycling?
Yeah, so this could be its own whole topic. I think for us, we have a similar goal. I don't support it as much zero waste and our plastics reduction targets. That's a super important part of our business. While we work with our suppliers on waste, the truth is we need to stop it further up, which is the extended producer liability. We should be taking responsibility for that as people who are asking someone to make those things. And on recycling, we continue to advocate for closed loop systems wherever we can, and for recycling infrastructure and compost infrastructure. And we have one gentleman who works just in the policy space, Martin Wolf, who's been with us for forever, and he's a wonderful advocate. So so he absolutely works to help the industry move towards better solutions.
Great. Yes, I think you're right. We could do a whole nother session on the plastics targets and packaging targets of 7th generation. Well, I want to turn it back over to Melanie. And thank you, Chris, so much for this really engaging conversation.
Yes, absolutely.
Thank you.
Thank you both so much. This has been incredible. But that is all the time that we have for today. We hope you enjoyed this conversation on 7th generation's efforts to mitigate greenhouse gas emissions in its supply chain, and certainly applaud the company's ambitious climate goals that they have set for 2030. Thank you, Tim and Chris, for your time and engaging insights today. Again, the recording of this conversation will be posted on the Pure Strategies website, which has lots of additional resources that might be of use for your business. We look forward to connecting with you again in the near future. Stay well, everyone, and enjoy the rest of the summit. Thank you.
Thank you.